下来，然后喂你吃。
One of the most terrifying, fascinating, devastating, and above all, disturbing viruses that recent horror cinema has given us is the ALVIN virus, the neurological pathogen that triggers the nightmares seen in the sadness. A virus that doesn't turn its victims into the Walking Dead or completely strip them of reason, but instead brings out the worst in humanity and disables the moral brakes that keep civilization functioning. This is a virus that was initially thought to be just a kind of flu, but within hours, it destroyed all social structures and brought to the surface the most primal human impulses, with a level of violence and cruelty that is deeply unsettling to witness. And for that reason, it is one of the most grotesque and dangerous viruses seen in recent years. This is why in this video, we'll take a deep dive into the sadness, to explain exactly what the ALVIN virus is. The sadness begins on a relatively normal day, with TV programs talking about a mysterious flu arriving from a neighboring continent. In a morning interview, we see a virology expert warning about the risk of this new pathogen. However, the host downplays his warnings, and since it's election season, the government chooses to ignore the growing health crisis. The virologist, who had spent a year studying the virus, described it as a variant related to lyssaviruses, the family of viruses to which rabies belongs. The comparison isn't just rhetorical, since the pathogen's RNA contains protein chains typical of that genus, suggesting a functional relationship. However, the infection route is not the same. While classic rabies slowly travels through the spinal cord to reach the brain, ALVIN acts with far greater precision and much faster, going directly to the limbic system, the brain's emotional center responsible for processing basic impulses like fear, anger, and desire. And this is where the true transgression happens. The virus alters neural connections, linking the areas that regulate aggression with those that control sexual impulses in an abnormal way. The result is a moral short circuit that eliminates all capacity for empathy or ethical restraint, but leaves cognitive functions fully intact, even heightened. So instead of turning a person into something clumsy or irrational, ALVIN transforms them into someone fully aware and dangerously uninhibited. In other words, ALVIN doesn't zombify the host like a typical zombie virus would. Instead, it rewires them, not to suppress intelligence, but to erase empathy, enhancing violence as a form of pleasure. That's why when someone succumbs to the virus, we don't see a stiff, rotting corpse, but a lucid individual capable of speaking, planning, running, aiming a weapon, using tools or setting traps, but with a moral compass pointed toward cruelty. And paradoxically, they have tears in their eyes. That's where the film gets its name, the sadness, because the infected cry. They cry because, apparently, what they once were is still in there. They feel the weight of what they were about to do, and they can't stop themselves. Regarding its origin, the film suggests two complementary ideas. On the one hand, there's the biological vector that explains how ALVIN mutates, adapts, finds more vulnerable hosts, and, like any strain evolving through human transmission, shortens incubation times until it becomes nearly instantaneous in certain contexts. On the other hand, there's a social reading. In a climate of misinformation, upcoming elections, media figures mocking public alarm, and a general population that underestimates the risk, all of this creates the perfect window for a virus that begins as a flu to evolve into an apocalypse. Interestingly, some early cases do seem containable, as certain individuals' immune systems are able to fight off the virus, at least temporarily. What we do know is that as ALVIN continues to spread, it finds ways to overcome those defenses in a growing percentage of the population, eventually reaching, at least within the fiction, terrifying numbers, with millions infected in a matter of hours. But how is ALVIN transmitted? Unlike other zombie infections, here the bite isn't the only, or even the main, method. The primary vector is contact with bodily fluids. Saliva is the most common medium. A spit, a sneeze, a drop of blood, or any nearby secretion can be enough to infect someone. Worst of all, the infected seem to be intuitively aware of this and act accordingly. They spit, lick, scratch, bite, and vomit as if they know it's their best method for spreading the virus. Additionally, there are signs of limited airborne transmission, but the on-screen sources make it clear that if this occurs, the viral load is lower and the process is slower, with progressive symptoms that give some time to react. The progression of the virus is noticeable in stages. At first, especially when transmitted through the air, it resembles a common flu: fever, fatigue, and general discomfort. Then comes confusion, brief hallucinations, and an unexplainable sense of fear. After that, the infected enter a phase of extreme euphoria. Their energy spikes, their eyes become bloodshot and constantly tear up, and a disturbing smile appears, a clear point of no return. The infected person continues to remember, speak, and move normally, but loses all moral restraint. They no longer seek survival or nourishment, but rather pain and pleasure from causing it, as if the virus turns this into a need. This is a key point for understanding their behavior. The infected don't attack out of hunger or mere rage. They attack to torture. They need others to suffer in order to feel satisfied. This is why, except under special circumstances, they don't attack each other. If the other is also enjoying the pain, the circuit doesn't complete. There is no suffering victim, and thus no fuel for their compulsion. At the same time, many of them appear to experience their own pain with ambivalence. They feel it, yes, but ALVIN reinterprets it and associates it with a dopamine spike, pushing them toward more extreme situations. The result is a sadistic behavior that draws upon the individual's existing skills. Another difference from the classic zombie is that ALVIN doesn't rot the body. The infected don't decay or become clumsy. They retain athletic abilities and seek basic self-preservation when no victims are nearby. That said, they don't form hierarchies, or at least not during the events of the film. In improvised groups, they collaborate toward a shared goal: to cause harm. And since they remain lucid, they can wait, pretend, or even negotiate short-term if it means they'll have the opportunity to inflict more cruelty later. But even so, they can't fully silence their conscience. The tears show that their original self witnesses all these acts, powerless to stop what the body is doing. With the virus context established, it's time to follow the timeline of events. The sadness shows us the outbreak through the eyes of Jim and Kat, a normal couple who, without meaning to, get caught in the worst imaginable nightmare. It all begins on an ordinary day, with the two of them having breakfast in a minor argument. Jim starts to suspect something is wrong when he sees an elderly woman covered in blood on a nearby rooftop, who vanishes the moment Jim looks away. He soon talks to his neighbor, who appears to have flu-like symptoms and doesn't think much of it. When they go outside, the couple sees police arresting a bloodied man, and nearby, a body is being loaded into an ambulance. Jim drops his girlfriend Kat at the subway station, and when he returns, he notices that both the police and the nearby people have disappeared. Everything explodes when he goes into a cafe and sees the same woman from the rooftop suddenly spit on a customer and attack the cafe worker by pouring boiling oil on his face, causing it to melt. Out of nowhere, the man she spat on stands up and starts stabbing everyone around him. From that point on, true chaos begins. Jim is chased by a group of infected and manages to make it back to his home, but suddenly his neighbor attacks him and slices off 2 of his fingers. Jim manages to take him down quickly and escapes to the street, only to be chased again by a horde of infected who even shoot at him. One of the most memorable scenes takes place in the subway. Kat is seated calmly when a man begins harassing her, and she firmly rejects him. Suddenly, an infected person boards the train and begins a massacre, leaving behind piles of bodies and the floor soaked in red. In the end, the harasser also becomes infected and gives in to his darkest urges. And the worst part is that he chooses Kat as his target. After fleeing for several minutes, Kat and another survivor arrive at a hospital where, for a moment, everything seems calm. There are people who appear uninfected, and on TV, a government broadcast shows several officials, including the president, giving a hopeful speech to the public. But unbeknownst to them, even the Minister of Defense was already infected. He grabs the president and shoves a grenade into his mouth. In that moment, everything becomes clear. No one is safe anymore. The very people who were supposed to contain the chaos have fallen, and the government begins to collapse from within. The chaos erupts, and the infected businessman who had harassed Kat on the subway finally arrives at the hospital, wearing the same sadistic smile as the other infected. She tries to escape and manages to grab a phone and flee, leaving the entrance open for the man to attack everyone at the reception. The businessman enters the building and soon finds Molly, who is completely defenseless. What follows is one of the most grotesque scenes in the entire film and ends with Molly becoming infected as well. Kat, still alive, manages to send a message to Jim from the phone she took. She tells him she's at NTU Hospital. At last, after everything, they manage to communicate. Miraculously, both are still alive. As she talks to him, Jim notices a mannequin head floating in the water. He begins to hallucinate and starts crying, a clear sign that he is already infected. Kat hides and tries to resist, but the businessman appears. He bluntly tells her that he won't stop until he gets what he wants and blocks the entrance so no one can interfere. Kat manages to grab a fire extinguisher, sprays it into his eyes, and hits him with all her strength. He smiles and tells her they're the same, violent and broken inside, but she finishes him off. At that moment, a side door opens and Dr. Wong appears, the same virologist who had warned about the ALVIN virus and who had been trying to develop a cure. He points a gun at Kat, forces her into a chemical shower, and handcuffs her to a metal pipe. Wong believes Kat might be immune since she's covered in infected blood and has shown no symptoms. Because of this, he watches her closely while awaiting a government helicopter that is supposedly going to land on the roof. While Kat is being decontaminated, Jim finally arrives at the hospital. The doctor reveals that he has spent a year warning others about the virus's mutation, but no one listened. Kat prepares for a blood extraction, but hears a noise coming from a trash bin. When she looks inside, she finds an infected baby, and she realizes it was all a trap. Wong, with a syringe, injects her with infected blood to confirm whether she's truly immune. According to his hypothesis, she should turn in less than 5 minutes. Dr. Wong, in the meantime, confesses something terrible. He says he killed all the newborns in the maternity ward because if the infected reached them, they would have done far worse. This is a reference to the Cross comic, from which the film draws inspiration. Desperate to contact Jim, Kat grabs his locked phone. She uses her breath to see the fingerprint smudges on the screen and deduces the unlock pattern. She manages to unlock it and sends a message to Jim. Soon after, they head for the rooftop, but 2 infected ambush them, and one chops off the doctor's foot with an axe. He manages to shoot back, but another infected vomits directly onto the wound. He is now infected, but before succumbing, he forces Kat to take him to the roof, still believing the government might save them. However, Jim finds them on the way, but his face says it all. He's now fully infected. Wong shoots him in the neck, and just as he's about to finish him off, the gun explodes. It had been made with a 3D printer. Jim seizes the moment and slashes the doctor's neck with a sickle. As Wong bleeds out, he says he enjoyed what he did in the maternity ward. Kat runs and locks herself behind the gate. Jim, still lucid, tells her he feels good, better than ever, and that he finally has a purpose. And that purpose is her. When he heard her voice, he knew he had to find her, to be with her and torture her. Kat listens, paralyzed, as he describes what he's going to do to her. Her mind shatters. She cries, then starts to laugh, and begins to drool, just like him and just like all the others. She runs to the rooftop just as the helicopter lands. In the final scene, we only see Jim's distorted, deranged face as gunfire echoes in the background, suggesting that Kat dies off screen. The film ends with heavy metal music in a closing sequence that could trigger seizures in viewers with epilepsy. Unlike other zombie stories, ALVIN is a more realistic virus. It simply shuts off more restraint. In films like 28 Days Later or World War Z, where zombies usually react to the presence of the uninfected, here they actively seek out more victims. And the real problem is what they want to do to them. On top of that, the infected are just as intelligent as any average person, making them much harder to keep at bay. Now, what do internal sources suggest about the possibility of reversing ALVIN? There is talk of natural immunity in some cases, which, in a world with more reaction time, might have given humanity the chance to develop a vaccine. Although personally, I believe that even if the government had listened to the virologist from the beginning, they still wouldn't have had enough time. Maybe a strict quarantine could have given them a chance, but we already know how that would have turned out too. However, based on what we saw with Jim and his neighbor, exposure to a low viral load triggers a slower process. That, in terms of containment, would mean that face masks, face shields, waterproof clothing, and decontamination protocols would be effective tools, at least in the early stages. But The Sadness is not a movie about a country that organizes its response and saves the day. It's one about a country that reacts late and at the wrong time, which feels much closer to reality. But the most intriguing mystery surrounding the ALVIN virus is the question that remains after the virologist's death. Is it the virus that causes all the actions, or does it simply remove the moral barriers? Several scenes offer hints. For example, the businessman on the train, who was already crossing lines by harassing Kat. Once infected, he becomes a completely ruthless and unhinged predator. Or the virologist himself, who admits he enjoyed committing the atrocity in the hospital. In conclusion, The Sadness uses ALVIN not just to spill blood, but to pose a dilemma that lingers long after the credits roll. How fragile is the fabric we call civilization? If just a couple of viral proteins and a handful of stupid speeches on the internet are enough to unravel it, then the real fear isn't the monster, it's the possibility. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.